back, everybody, to the Soul Butter podcast. This is our second episode, and we are going to kind of jump on the back of what we talked about last week, but we're going to tune into one particular idea that we were discussing around the concept of time, and how Western culture in particular has emphasized this idea of linear time around the calendar. Yet if we go back to ancient times, it was much more focused on cycles, right? And this idea that God actually created time through cycles, and that we can see these cyclical things happening around us in nature all the time. And, the whole theme of last week's episode around the ability to rest and trust that we are in a season of rest is to just look around and see what God's creation is doing. What laws is nature obeying right now? And understanding that we are an intimate part of nature, and to get on board. And that this would bring a greater sense of rest into our lives, a greater sense of peace. And so we wanted to go a little bit deeper into this idea of cyclical time, cycles, how this shows up for us, as far as, not only from the idea of the things that we can expect or come to depend on, right? Those things that actually do create something foundational for us. We don't even have to think about the fact that the sun comes up every morning. We don't have to think about the fact that every 14 days, the moon creates a cycle, right? And so that 28-day cycle altogether. We don't have to think about the tides. We don't have to think about the seasons. These things are just happening. And so there is something inherently good about that, and foundational, secure, and safe. But then there's the other side of things that are cyclical, which are challenges and obstacles. So we were encountering, and we wanted to talk about obstacles because of our own tiny testimony in just attempting to try to upload our first YouTube video.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And, talking about the irony of always having that thing that you can come to rely upon. Like, I've done it 1,000 times. I have a video editor on my computer. I, drop the file in, I pull in the photos, I link them together, I create the transitions, I export it and put it up. It's not a big deal. Oh my.
Not this time.
No, and my spiritual people will giggle when I say that Mercury retrograde jumped up and punched me right in the throat over the last 24 hours. Everything that could have gone wrong on my computer went wrong. My video editors kept shutting down, and they were creating this image of corrupted files. And it was like everywhere I turned to try to create some sort of, problem solving method, or to try to take a new route, the landslide came. The rock was in my path, right? And Egan will laugh, because she literally was on a walk this morning and showing me pictures of the rocks from the landslide in California on her path. But, this idea of how do you handle those obstacles and challenges when they come into your life, and what's the toolbox that you're going to in order to handle these situations as they come? Like, where's your mindset with that? How are you feeling about it? How do you feel about your feelings about it? And so we wanted to open up a dialogue around, this idea of not only cyclical obstacles and challenges, but how cycles actually can serve us.
Yeah, I mean, just like you say, the law of inherent goodness, which to me, I think about one of my favorite scriptures when I was going through my darkest obstacle, my darkest time, is God kept telling me everything works out for good for those that are called to me, for those that are following me. I'm going to take all of this and work it out for good. And to me, that is like ultimate faith. When you trust that no matter what comes your way, he's going to work it all out for good. So these cycles, as you and I have talked about before, these cycles, the things are going to continue to present themselves to you through life. And, till we get to master. It's about the mastery, getting closer to that perfect soul that will never be, but getting closer to that. What are the things that keep presenting themselves to you, and how do you handle them? And sometimes it's as small as like a technological, speed bump. And
Mhm.
it's like God showing you in a small amount of time how you handle when challenges come into your life. So that could just be, if you really look at that, like I think about, in my coaching school, they always say, I don't know if they came up with it, but it really got in my heart. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. So
Mhm.
how you, Jenny, handled, I was super busy this week. So I had to put it all on Jenny. All the pressure was on. I'm like, thank you so much. Like I'm just getting back to California from my holiday trip, and I just couldn't do a lot of things. And I knew the pressure was already on her. And then it was like all these like roadblocks were put in the way. And Jenny was talking about how in California, we have all this crazy rain, which we never have. In Southern California, we get some rain, and even a little bit of rain, man, the earth will just shed the rocks. The rocks will go tumbling down. I was telling Jenny how one just bullseye hit a car, and I mean it was bigger than me. This boulder hit the car. So think about, like, those things can happen in your life. You can get the big boulders to fall, but it's just like we're talking about. Even nature shows this. Even nature shows like the shedding of these you know, obstacles that are now in my way. I mean, there's deer, there's things that take that path too. It's not just a human that now we got to try to get around. It's rerouted, but like, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to stand there and cry? Because some people do that. Some people stand there and cry. And then what we're talking about, more going back to the cyclical, these things keep presenting themselves, and whoever is listening right now kind of knows, like their heart speaking to them, like I kind of know what my thing is that keeps presenting them. How for me it was always men, and I'm sure it was in a lot of things that I did, but men will keep presenting themselves. And I know people can identify that have been in that lifestyle for a long time, or you think back before you were married, like you kind of always attract the same thing, even the same friends. Because if you're codependent, which you brought up earlier, if you're codependent, you'll keep attracting those people who want to suck the life out of you. And then you walk around whining all the time. Like, there's just all these people that want so much from me. I'm such a good person. And they keep begging, they keep just needing. And it's like, you as a good friend would be like, well, tell them no. Stop the cycle. The cycle keeps coming back over and over again. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's I think one of the most effective exercises inside of the coaching relationship to have someone look at, I mean, you only have to start with one area of your life. That's it.
Exactly.
Because the patterns that you will discover inside of that one area of life will ultimately end up showing up in every other area. Just like you can discover successes in one area of life and apply however it was that you created that success there and mimic it in other areas of life. But because we are compartmentalized thinkers, right? Because the ego is, that's how we learn. We organize, we compartmentalize, we do all of these things in order to be able to form critical thought, which is part of our problem solving. And, it's necessary. It's part of our reasoning, right? Which, it's when I was doing the research on the calendars, I found a blog post that was actually written by a Christian pastor. And he was talking about the perspective of cyclical time in scripture. And then he started to talk about the purpose of cycles. And I mean, he simplified it so much. He really just kind of laid it down in two levels. It was like, we need cycles in order to have consistency, security, and safety in our lives, that we can, even in those moments where we feel completely lost, there are things that we can expect, right? We do not have to worry about the sun coming up every morning. We do not have to worry about the tides. We do not have to worry about the moon. We do not have to worry about the seasons changing. Like there's certain things that we can come to expect in our lives, and we don't have to micromanage it because nature is simply obeying natural law, right, inside of those cycles. And so there is this inherent goodness, this inherent security in knowing that natural law is just going to chug along, right? Then there's the other side of it, which is cyclical challenges and obstacles, and this idea of being given another opportunity to try again, right? And you can, if you look at it from more of like the scriptural biblical reference, they're using the word sin, right? And so, Egan and I were having our own offline conversation about this over the last couple of days of like, what was the origin of sin? Like, why did that happen? And we'll talk about that another day, because man, the philosophical rabbit holes that we were going down, I mean, so much fun. But this idea of, and she said that one of the original translations was, you missed the mark. What was it?
Yeah, I don't know the actual word. I know I have it in a journal somewhere, but is the Hebrew word, the original word for sin, means it's translated out really to you missed the mark. So it's such a beautiful way of saying, like, God isn't saying you sinner, it's like when you're heading towards your trying, God knows how human we are. I mean, he made us. So like we try, but when we miss the mark, which is God, ultimately, we want to be able to be developed, like I said before, into this like master of ourselves. And we go to hit the mark and we're just off. It's such a more beautiful way to talk about it.
Right. And so, sin ultimately is just detouring away from God's ultimate hope for us, which is inherent goodness, inherent love, trying to live the best life that we can, but outside of only just self-interest, but for the highest good also, right? So this natural law is always conspiring in that. Like the universe doesn't care about you or your choices. It's just going to function under natural law. So natural law says you plant a seed, you're going to get a harvest. What does that look like? Right. So, or you make a decision, you set something into motion. Every single time you make a choice, you set a cycle into motion, right? Because there's going to be consequence to that decision. Consequence not meaning bad, just consequence, cause and effect, right? So also a natural law, cause and effect, right? And so this idea of, and I always like to use the infinity sign, like I always think of that completion of energy. And again, we're talking about cyclical time, which means there's no real beginning or end, right? So infinite, right? That infinite idea. But that whatever it is that you're sending out is going to come back. And so it will bear fruit one way or another, right? And so this idea of, I mean, it goes all the way back to the gift of reason, that, and, part of our debate was, well, was there the gift of reason and intellect given to other species other than just mankind? Is that why the angels had their issues? Were they also given that opportunity to make a choice between right and wrong? But ultimately, God, by introducing reason, had to know that at some point we were going to make the wrong decisions, right? Which is why all these models of sin and the commandments and, all of these things then were kind of created some sort of government, right? It was like, we need something to kind of govern us, to direct us not only into making right choices for ourselves, but making right choices for the common good. Right. And so this is what philosophers have been talking about, since Aristotle. So, this idea that you are the creator of your circumstance through the choices that you make. Right now, there's always going to be things that are out of our control, like the rock falling on that car.
But that also is presenting itself as a challenge to see how you handle it. Like, to me, that person isn't it, and I could be making this up in my head, but to me, that person probably has a lot of things that happen like that. I bet you they're like, see, not that they're like mean or nasty or anything, but like, or have a bad attitude towards life, but like, this would only happen to me. Right. Because that cycle keeps coming back in their life, and probably all of their friends and family are going, only you, because like you just said, we're creating our destiny. What we plant will come out. Like if you plant in the middle of a bunch of weeds and you don't weed out, like that, I mean, that goes back to relationships. There's so many different, facets of where we can learn in our life. And I love that you said, like, again, back to coaching, like just analyze that one thing in your life. Relationships are a great place to start. Like, where is it you need to work? Because these are the situations that are probably keep returning to you. You said just about the scriptures, all things work together for good to those who are called according to his purpose. But I remember like kind of like when we first, I think it was we started talking again on Marco Polo and really like came back into our lives. You said something to me a long time ago about how, if you don't look at evil, people get all weird when I say devil or Satan. I don't really put that much on it. Like, I just think of it as like, oh, that little, not today, Satan. What I'm saying is, you said to me, I just believe, and it's what I'm saying, all things work together, but these things are presenting themselves, evil, sin, all these things just come into our lives to shine the light on what we need to work on constantly. So that situation has presented itself to you. It's a learning lesson. Instead of, I don't know the exact quote, but it's something like, and you may know it, but it's like, instead of saying, why me, God, just say, why, God? Like, tell me why, as a genuine question. Like, why am I going through this? It's such a shift of mindset. Like, what are you trying to tell me here? Instead of why me? Why is this happening? Like a genuine question. So you can start kind of getting down into the nitty gritty of like what he's trying to show you and what he's trying to teach you. So you can kind of rewrite that cycle. I mean, what happens when, or redirect, what happens when you stop the cycle? What does that look like? And you're able to say no more. And I'm stopping. It'd probably take you a few of those loops to get there. Is it it's just a redirect and you'll start a new cycle, but maybe it's a more on the path of what God had for you anyway. I mean, I know what it feels like. I can tell you that, because when I redirected my cycle, now I'm in this godly space of just peace and constant joy and lightness, and nothing really gets to me. I've been working on relationships for a long time meaning years, like 4 or 5 years, and I'm getting to the point now where like I'm standing my ground. I know who I am. I know what I want in my life, and I'm no longer that person that says, why me, God? Why all these people keep going and they just drain me, and I used to say, like, I attract all these people that just need me. Like, really? Like, no, maybe it's because you need to be needed. So it's these things we have to work on. And now my flow and my cycle has just become so much more lighter. The seeds that I'm planting, the trees just growing and blooming all this beautiful fruit. And it's just such a lighter, beautiful way to live. When we finally face why these things keep coming and hitting us again, like they come around and boom, uppercut, like just.
I like the fact that you said that it might not be an instant close, to the cycle. You might have to do a couple more laps, but it's going to be with a brand new wisdom, a brand new perspective, and you're going to be practicing in a much different way because you're seeing it in a whole new way. And, I especially teach this in my intuitive course, the difference between that critical voice and the voice of curiosity, that voice of wonder, and that voice of the child, right? Where it's, I wonder what, when kids are little, my 5-year-old is like, my husband and I call it the machine gun question period, where it's just
wise.
One question after another, after another, after another. And, I'll hear Brian say the question and answer period is now ended.
Exactly.
But, this idea of just wonderment, right? And curiosity, and that curious mind will instantaneously connect you with a different way of thinking about the same situation that you've been in for a long time. And especially when it comes to the feelings that you're having about a particular cycle. It's like, okay, so when I was dealing with the computer stuff, it was like, I felt anxious. I felt frustrated, and it was like, well, of course I feel frustrated and anxious because I had my own personal deadline, that I was trying to hit. And it was definitely frustrating dealing with, all of these things that were completely out of my control. But, at the same time, there was this giggling voice in my head that was like, oh, well, we make plans and God laughs, and, we will figure it out. It was like, this was our plan, but apparently there was, something else needed to be looked at, and Egan and I both share the same issue of really having to relax into the flow. And, we're given opportunities to do that all the time, even though we're much better about managing ourselves now. It doesn't mean that the obstacles cease. The way that you're going to deal with it is going to be different. There's going to be a much greater sense of peace, resolution right from the beginning, surrender. Not that we aren't brought to our knees sometimes by certain challenges, but, I always say that's, when you were talking about that last week, you're brought to your knees because you need to look up, right? And it's in that moment that you will hear more clear than any other time. And so, unfortunately, humans are driven by pleasure and pain. And, in the situations where there's nothing and there's no real motivation, this or that, we will kind of stay in a place of apathy or, like ambivalence and maybe do nothing, and then we're never planting seeds and then we never get fruit. And then we develop this idea that that's what our life looks like, that we just are never going to bear fruit, so all of these ideas, end up just because of the fact that something's not meeting expectations, right? And we talked about that last week too. But this idea of going back to this idea of you being the creator of your own cycle, and this idea of planting and farming, that we prayer, like we pray for something with the expectation that what's going to come back to us in cycle. And, I see this in the manifestation idea all the time, right? This manifestation of like, it's supposed to be, rainbows and unicorns. Like you put the manifestation out and it's supposed to look just like your vision board when it comes back in, right? And yet sometimes our prayers are actually answered through obstacle. And that becomes our classroom in order to actually achieve the consciousness of the thing that we were praying for. So before we, jumped on and recorded, this was actually, it was a little reel that was sent to me by my friend Chris Lapani. And then Amy found the actual quote, but it is, I asked for strength and God gave me difficulties to make me strong. I asked for wisdom and God gave me problems to solve. I asked for courage and God gave me dangers to overcome. I asked for patience and God placed me in situations where I was forced to wait. I asked for love and God gave me troubled people to help. I asked for favors and God gave me opportunities. I asked for everything so I could enjoy life, and instead he gave me life so I could enjoy everything. I received nothing I wanted, and I received everything I needed. So, this idea of, last week we also talked about making space for that giant gift, that blessing that sometimes, doesn't look exactly the way we think it should.
So much. I have 15,000 thoughts now. I'm like, how am I going to keep all these in my head while she's talking? First, I love that so much. And I think that anybody hear that, it's not a hard concept to get. If you've been living long enough, that's exactly how this works. And I always said this prayer, like, why can't I just like stay close to you all the time? And why don't I gotta like learn lessons? Like, I don't want to learn any more lessons. Stop giving me lessons. Like, and I used to say this prayer where I want to feel as close to you, God, as I feel when I'm on my knees and the worst possible things happening. Because control, I like want to make sure maybe if I can do that and I can like serve you and praise you all the time, you stop giving me the lessons. Like, just stop that. But it was really cool because that actually does happen. Not that the lessons stop coming. It's just like I was saying, that you get on this different cycle, and it's like when they come and that peace that comes. And I was just doing my meditation this morning and talking to God, and I was just like, thank you, God, for allowing me to get to the point where I can live. And like when the challenges come, and I'm sure some will keep coming and they'll be awful because it's life, somebody's going to die, things are going to happen. But overall, I have this, like when things come my way, like I feel like I'm flowing with him, so close to him, even when nothing's happened. That space you just talked about, where it presents itself to be complacent. The enemy, the darkness, Satan, whatever you want to call it, like that's where he can do the most work, man. Like when he can get you complacent and nothing's really happening. And that's why I believe God is like, all right, you're complacent, I'm throwing that boulder in your way. Because you think you can just walk every day, and every day, like you want to just complacent, you're doing your own thing, you're thinking your own thoughts, you're making your own plans. And he's like, boom. And here comes the boulder, you know, technologically, you can't do what you want to do. Your boulder comes. And I really do. It's definitely a newness in me. It's definitely God given. It has nothing to do with me. It's all the trials. I laugh now, just like you. I go, are you kidding me? This is so funny. Let me take a picture and show Jenny, and I'm going to climb over it, around it, you know, get a sledgehammer, break it up, whatever you need to do to get through it. It's just a total beautiful, even the obstacles are now fun. Like you said, like it's fun. Like be that kid. I thought that was so beautiful when you said that, because I love the idea of like the reparenting your inner child and being like, what are we going to do now? Like, because we can be the kid that we've been our whole lives, the one that pouts and screams and deals with its worth and shame and guilt and all these things we carry with us. Or I can choose, just like you said, it's the choice, it's the gift we're given to say, how am I going to handle this time? And it's just, I was just this morning, I was just in awe. I had a reflective moment, just being so grateful to God that like I'm living in a better way, that I feel like I've been trained to live this way to handle it. Like I can handle the punches now, because before I probably was a little bit, I mean, I used to joke, like, and Jenny knows this, like in college, like there's a saying I used to say all the time, I hate
Hate
this,
everything.
I hate everything, I hate everyone. I used to say it all the time because I just walked around frustrated. I was my little girl. I mean, we were only what, 17, 18, 19? Like, man, we were so young then. And that's how I handle things, just to sit and whine and complain about it. And I'll say my inner nature still wants to do that. But, you know, I have people talking about there's a message I've been really getting a lot. And I said in one of my coaching small groups that, where's your partner? Like and it's probably not your husband, because you're going to need a partner or wife or whatever. Like it's probably not them, because you're going to need somebody to complain about that person too, that's just so loving and graceful with you and not judgmental of this other person, and just to ride with you through it. Because man, when those obstacles come, if you don't have your ride or die, like literally with you, you could go nuts. And God has really been speaking a lot, you know, of that to me. Like that podcast I was watching of one of my favorite guy who does a podcast, he brought his like best friend, like his Jenny on. And he even says, like, this is my twin, like this is my guy. And I just think, you know, I'm so blessed to have a couple people like that in my life that are gonna ride with me when the obstacles come. I got somebody in my corner that's like, let's do this together, because man, it's hard to do it alone.
Well, I mean, I'm listening to you talk in the rhythm of this, right? It's like, and this is why I'm so passionate about understanding life from that perspective of spiritual science, where it's not separate. It is all God, all of it, everything, right? You know, I come from more of this, and I'm going to use the label again, the new age spiritual culture, where, you know, it's like we talk about karma, and, you know, we talk about, you know, those kinds of things, and focus on just the laws of the universe, and, you know, how the universe gives and takes, and, you know, that kind of thing. And understanding that it's so simple in its nature, yet we live through it in very complex ways. But once we start to discover the nature of it, like we were talking about through a coaching process, you only have to start in one place to be able to start unraveling the onion, and it will have an effect everywhere. Before you know it, this relationship has healed because you've been working on healing the relationship with your body, right? So
Exactly.
like it's all the same fundamentals and the same principles. And so it's like, how do you deal? And it's like being able to find a purpose partner is dependent on
Mhm.
how you handle obstacles inside of your own life. Are you ready to have a purpose partner in your life that can hold space for you in that way? Because codependence can rip that apart and take it right out from under you. It's like, not only do you trust that you can handle whatever challenge or obstacle is in your path because of this relationship, with spirit and with God, this trust, this ultimate trust and faith, then you will trust another human to deal with their own shit. Right? I mean, this is the nature of codependence, is that we will steal the responsibility from someone because our empathic nature, we can't stand to see someone suffer, so
Wow.
I'm going to jump in and control and micromanage. I'm going to helicopter parent that person in my life so they don't have to suffer, right? When all you're doing is prolonging their suffering because
Exactly.
they are in a cycle. They're in their own cycle. And if you parachute in to try to save them from their own cycle, then you're actually dooming them to repeat the same cycle over and over again, right? Because they didn't get to complete it. They didn't get to learn the lesson because you're too busy trying to control their outcome,
Mm.
right? Through your codependence, because you don't trust them to handle their own feelings. You don't trust them to handle their own behavior, their own decision making. So let me do it for you, right? It's going to be so much more difficult for you to magnetize in that level, that quality of purpose partner, unless you're doing the work yourself, right? Because
Yes.
there's not even going to be space for it in your life, and as far as this whole idea of um you know karmic cycles and that kind of thing, of like what goes around comes around, and that whole thing, it really is. There is, and you were talking about how the devil shows up. I think a lot of people pin that more negative consequence to karma, when
Yeah.
karma doesn't care about you.
Mm.
Like
No.
I said, there is no personality, no, it's not personal, right? Like the universe does not care that you're on your knees praying. It doesn't. It's going to respond according to God's law, period. Right? Yes, the law is inherently good, but do you have the space in your life, and have you done enough work in your own cycle to actually receive the gift? Right? And so, I started out the conversation with saying that Mercury retrograde like punched me in the throat over the last day. But you also have to look at the fact, and that's cultural too. Like you were talking about the people that and I know it, and it's the spiritual humor memes that pop up that talk about how murderous and awful these retrogrades are, and that we should batten down the hatches and not leave the house for like
Yeah.
a solid 6 weeks. But in fact, the retrograde period depends on the astrologer you're listening to, right? And this is what I mean about curiosity and perspective, because it can change everything, from the fact that it's like, it's not predictive. It's validating that circumstance that you're in right now. And what's being spoken into you, right? So retrograde period aligns with rest. And we talked about that last week. It's like this period of rest. We talked about, it's the words, right? So it's all the words that start with So review, rest, rejuvenate, relax, revisit, all of those things that allow us this period of actually retrieving what was in previous cycles and pulling it into our present moment. And we get time to really sit with it and look at it from hopefully a place of curiosity and not persecution.
Rest, all the words, and then I was thinking review when you said that. So that kind of fit right in there. A resting period is the review time, which is awesome because you were talking about Mercury retrograde, and like we think of all these problems coming. If you equate that in your brain, okay, it's Mercury, you hear someone say that, okay, it's resting period, which means it's a review period. And that is part of this cycle that yeah, I mean, I think that most people fight through that, right? I think it's our nature to be like, I don't have time. First of all, we're too busy. And I don't want to look at myself. Unless you're a growth-minded person, growth mindset person, which I would think we attract a lot of those people into, because they're not watching this far, unless they are. people know what we're talking about. And we also, just because your growth mindset doesn't mean that you're going to be like, yes, the challenges are risen, I'm ready to fight. Like, I am a lot now, but I didn't used to be. And I just wanted to touch back on the when you're not ready and the codependency. When you were talking about that, I thought about how unhealed I was and still in my messes, and how codependent I really was, because it's so much easier to take my energy and work on someone else that I have no business doing, because God has not given me that power. And like you said, I've learned how much I've gotten in the way of the other people healing, where I've caused them to recycle again into their own pattern. Like, I think of a long-term relationship I had, a couple of them, and all I did was prevent that person, to the point where, like, even if that person was 100% at fault in like bad things in our relationship, it doesn't matter. I was the cause of them stumbling, because if I would have left when I was supposed to, they may have been on their healing journey a little more, which I pray for. And, I want to talk about that too, forgiveness. But I wanted to say this one thing is, while I was in those relationships, our friendship, like my God-given purpose partner, was out of my life for a long period of time, and pushed out really in the beginning, and pushed away. But it's all in divine time. Like, I don't look back and go, oh, if this wouldn't have happened, maybe Jenny would have been in my life. I just think she wasn't supposed to be there, because we could have became super codependent. And we talk about that even now, being super careful, being codependent, because we just gel so much. We both don't want to lose the connection to God in that. Like, we want to be separate.
Lose ourselves in each other.
Exactly. Which you can do in any type of purpose partner relationship. So being very intentional. But I just wanted to say, as I was healing and becoming better and less codependent, which is exactly what I was healing, you came back into my life. We both came back into each other's lives.
I needed
And
that
then,
too.
exactly. And then it wasn't like I'm saying, like, that cycle wasn't like we were all good and then we came back. It was like we were ready to take that challenge, to be able to receive that person in our lives and work through things with them, because we were ready to be accountable. And that's like everything we're talking about right now. Like, be accountable to like these cycles. Like, be accountable. What is God showing you? Because if it keeps coming back up, you are not doing anything with it. And I just love how, we say this a lot in culture too, victim mentality. But it's just real. Like, that's real. And like, we can have the best of intentions. And I was just telling someone, I think yesterday, like, someone could really do you wrong. And culture and society would be like, yeah, they did you wrong. They did you wrong. Now I'm like, nope. Like, you attracted that person in your life. Why? I don't really care what they did to you. Why did you attract that person in? How did you handle it? How are you handling it now? Are you still playing the they did me wrong? Or are you putting yourself in the middle of that situation that you keep attracting? If you have a story that's written over and over and over again, everywhere I go, this is what happens. All the girls hate me. It's like, ding, ding, ding. That's what I hear in my coaching brain. I'm like, common denominator.
Is you.
I see what's happening. Every man I've ever been with, my relationships never work out. And they could all be a-holes. All men are a-holes. No, honey. Like, all men are not. You keep attracting them. Like, what is it in your life that you attract and you're playing victim to still? And as you break through these bigger things, man, like, eyes open up and you start seeing the little things, just like, over this week for you, with coming up into all these obstacles trying to get this podcast out. You've already did the work in so many other ways in your life that this is light. This is a light obstacle. Like, you get the bigger things and figure out what they are, and watch how easier your life gets. Ease, living in ease. You won't get as sick. You won't have disease, like, that's my goal. That's my life goal, peace and ease. And now that I have it, trust me when I say I will fight you. If you try to take it from me, no person, my boundaries are secure now. Like, no, I have, and not that I've built like a prison of any sort. I'm not going to, put my walls up. My boundaries are so thick now, no one can come in. I put myself in a prison, but I know who to let in. I know where and who and what and why I need to reside in my little space, in my little bubble, to keep my peace and my ease, because I did all the work. I take that back, God. I know I didn't do all the work, but then he's assigned to me so far.
So far. Yes. And it's that old saying that good fences make good neighbors, right? And fences aren't necessarily barricades. They're not fortress walls necessarily, although with some people in your life, you might have to develop more of a fortress type wall. But, this idea of what you're attracting, that there is something, and I do want to differentiate there. And we've said this a couple of times, like the boulder that fell on the car, that's a traumatic moment that you didn't ask for. And you certainly didn't push that boulder off the cliff, right?
Exactly.
So there's going to be those moments in life where trauma occurs, and we don't need trauma to be in purpose. We don't, but trauma does happen, and you aren't, you weren't required to go through all of this trauma to be who you are, right? It could have come in other ways, but these things happen. And so this opportunity to train our own behavior in any given situation then brings back this idea of the purpose of cycles, and where there is an inherent goodness in the ability to be in cycle. When we cycle in our own behavior, and cycle in our own feelings, and cycle inside of our own mindset, that we actually can create something that is aligned with God and natural law that we can depend on. And it helps us weather any storm, right? It doesn't mean that we're not going to have moments in our lives where we feel awful, and that things are freaking hard, and where we do go into a place, not for nothing, but dark night of the soul is its own cycle, right? And so, we cycle through those things a couple times in our lives.
Yeah, we have to die.
Some more than others.
We have to die constantly. That's, another theme that comes up, that I think unless you're mature spiritually, that's a hard thing to hear. You and I talk about it a lot. Dying to yourself, it's a part of the process. It is a cycle, and death in life happens all the time. Like we always think about the trees, like there is a dying to yourself that has to happen a lot. And
well, I mean, think about all of the philosophical books, even the like religious texts and different things, like I love the ones that are metaphorical and allegorical. I love the ones that take real life examples of nature as it stands out there, or the way that we interact with each other and in nature, and how that is used. These stories are used as an example to show us, how things occur in the natural world. And if we go into a death cycle of ourself, we can get trapped there. We can get trapped in that cycle. We can get trapped in the persecution. We can get trapped in the victimhood. We can get trapped in the grief and the despair and the doubt. We can get trapped there. And so, being able to flex our muscles enough, and when we can't, have those purpose partners around us to remind us of these things, so we don't have to. And you were kind of pointing towards this of like, it doesn't stop, but it almost does. And because of the fact that the way you approach it is totally different, so your cycle looks different, and also it moves faster, right? You don't stay in there as long because of the fact that you've got these well-developed muscles from all of this practice, right? But you have to be willing to actually face the practice, right? And when we die unto ourselves, one of the first things we do is turn our back on it, and we will disenfranchise every emotion we have, and we don't realize that that's an actual death process, that there's grief in that, that there could be physical pain involved in that. There could be illness that arises in that. We don't know what that shedding process is going to look like for us. God could present something totally unexpected.
Yeah, and then you got your medical intuitive over here that you're going to need. You got to give Jenny a call, because all this stuff's been stuck in you forever. And, like I think about the times where I was going through, and man, I always have a right shoulder pain, and Jenny can, explain that on another episode, but like I now know where that comes from, and just being very, aware. Now when that cycle comes up, I have a lot of pain. When I go to my parents, I get weird pains, and I'm like, like I know now, and I don't fight against it anymore. I'm like, okay. I mean, this time it was like back in my shoulder blade, and before I left California, it was in the right side, and then it switched to the left side. I'm talking like woke me up a little bit, wincing and crying in the middle of the night, pain. And I was like, okay, God's doing something. I paid attention this time. Like the pain is going to come up and out. That was a part of the cycle. And now having you in my life and being able to understand a little more of what pain actually means, because like you just said, how is it going to come up and out of you? I thought, you know what, this could be a good thing. Yeah, it hurts right now, but I feel like, and I kept telling my parents, like, oh, you got to go to our chiropractor. I'm like, no, it'll be gone. And they're like, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm like, I can't move. I'm like, it's going to leave me, because I know my cycles now. I've gotten to know myself, and it's such a beautiful journey when you can deal with pain, is what you were just saying. Like you can deal with pain a little better because I know it now. I know what pain feels like. And I'm not talking just physical. I'm talking like the angst in my soul when I have to face something again. And I knew that something was healing and coming up and out of my body that was pretty foundational, because I was with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's a deeper. If you don't follow Jenny, that's probably a little deeper, but it's just the beauty in growing in these cycles and learning, and not being, you said like, and they come and you don't turn your back to it. You are, and you and I are just like this. I'm ready to learn everything and anything at all times. Like, what are you teaching me, God? Going back to not why me, but like, why, God? Like, show me why. Ask the question, because as you'll always hear me say, because like scripture says, like, he's so easy. You just ask. He literally says that. Just ask me, please. I mean, that's the one tattoo I wanted to get, like someday, like, because I always forget, like, just like ask God, did you pray? Did you talk to him? Like, stop toiling over all this stuff. Just ask and say, why? Why does this thing keep returning to me? What is it I'm not learning? And so prayer, prayer, talking to God. That's all it is.
And
That's
I mean,
all.
it's sending, and God supports the delivery of the blessing through the natural law that is an aspect of creation. And, this idea that, you're not going to get served with the same level of wisdom when it's just slingshotting off the universe, right? The universe is a tool of God. So if you're sending it all the way to the top management,
Mm-hmm.
the clarity of what is going to come to you is so much stronger. And, I mean, this is certainly something I, as part of my own testimony over the last couple of years, the clarity of the answers is so much different. And, you're going to get served back from the universe either way, but
Yep.
what do you want slingshotting back at you? And so, this idea of ask and you shall receive is God, and it's in the law of attraction. It's, in The Secret. It's, it's all of these things. It's like everybody is doing the same thing and looking for it in different places, right? But, this idea that, the more purity in the request, or in that prayer, or in the declaration of it, the more clarity and purity in what will be brought back in the blessing. Now, we can't say what that blessing is going to look like. We just can't. It's like that little poem that, we read halfway through. It potentially could be brought to us in a way that we have to flex some muscle, but ultimately on the other side of that, the prayers are being answered. But, it is, and it goes back to too, like making that space. It's like, okay, so if Amy's on her walk in the cliffs and she comes to a place where there's a big rock in her path, if she takes the time to look at that rock and figure out, okay, maybe I could move this over here. If she stops and does it right then the next time she comes back, the path is going to be clear, right? Or she could leave that rock there, and then the next time she goes for a walk, now there's 3 more blocked up by that rock. right?
Wow.
And this is while like when you are, I don't think you ever really stop moving, right? Because that's the law of energy and the law of motion. It's like we're always in motion. So your cycle never stops, but there could be a place where you're gathering rocks, right? And that's the place that we say we're stuck in because we just keep banging into it, right? I mean, the cycle is going to keep going. Like everything is temporary. Change is one of the only constants we have in our lives. But like how much are you going to let, how much congestion are you going to allow in that one part of the cycle and still continue to complain about it? Right? It's like you must face the challenge. And this is where pain becomes temporary, or does pain turn into suffering?
Oh goodness. See, you do it to me every time. I was just thinking about, I was just imagining those rocks building up and building up and building up. And it's not like the other side doesn't exist anymore. It's just this perception in your head that now you're blocked. And that's it. And that is a block. We talk about that spiritually. Like you can have a block in your body of energy. Like this isn't, like, we use metaphors all the time because that's what we do. But like you said, even scripture and all of the ancient writings, like that's what people did. They looked to nature. But you think about all of those blocks backing up. And like I said to Jenny, I'm like, well, at least you didn't just scream and throw your hands up and say, forget it, I'm not putting out the episode, it's not working, we're done. Like
I quit.
I quit, just forget it. I would literally be like, what? Like,
It's a
no.
sign. God's saying we're not supposed to do this. It's a sign. I quit.
Right. Exactly. So, your attitude is everything. And like you said, like, so that rock was there this morning, like I can work around it and say, I work around it. And I'm like, you know what? I could climb up the hill. It'll be a little harder to get around, but I think I can do it. I'll just go over it or under it or around it or break it up, learning the way to get around things. But guess what? One day that rock's not going to be there. Whether I get it out, which probably won't be me in that circumstance, but somebody's going to come clear that path. But to me, that's God taking care of us. Like, look, you can keep going, or you can get stuck. I could literally walk out and be like, screw it, I'm not going today. I guess I'm not going to go today. Like it's always an option. That's the beauty of life. Like to know that if you don't keep going, like you said, that was such a good visual for me. Like the rocks might keep falling there, and eventually no one's going to be able to pass inside of you. Like that's where you get stuck. I mean, I know there's this great saying I heard somebody say at some point, grieving and mourning, they feel the same, but there's a time and space, to everything. Turn. There's a season for everything. And that mourning was designed for short term. And we're supposed to, like all the stuff we're saying, mourning is supposed to be, and let's not think just death of a person. Like you can go there in your head because it applies really simply in your head, but think about the mourning you need to do over things that you've lost in your life, and you can get trapped there. But mourning was just supposed to be for a season. You can grieve forever. This is what this person said. Like you can grieve. You may have seasons where, again, that cycle comes back, a memory comes back, Christmas comes back, their birthday's here, if we're talking about a person, and oh, grieve, ouch. But mourning is a season. And some cultures shut it down. I mean, like things shut down. In America, we don't do stuff like that. We reflect our society and culture. So we say, oh, they died.
All done now. It's time to go.
Right. How many days do I get? 3 days grievance. Okay. I'm, whatever that is in the world, like it's time for you to move on. But some cultures take that time for rest and they shut it down, and sometimes a month. Like families coming over and they take that mourning space and just mourn, and God's just speaking to me now, like in the friendships that we have and the purpose partner friendships, like if you got a good one, they'll let you mourn as long as you want, but then when it's time to be done, like I'm gonna yank you back out of there. So in these seasons of our lives, just again, stuckness, catching where you're stuck in the cycle. Like you said, we'll keep moving, but that place is going to get a little more cloud, a little more. Those rocks are going to keep building, and it's going to get more and more difficult. And you might get stuck, like a person stuck in mourning. We've seen those people, and somebody might be listening. Like I always talk about this because it's always not odd to me. I guess that's the best word I can say. Like it's like people redefine themselves by somebody that's passed, like a mom that passed too soon. And look, my heart's with you. Like my mom didn't pass. I get it. I got empathy, but like, you got stuck there. Like, live your life. Let's go. So what are we mourning still? Not as a person. Are we mourning something that we might have lost? And what can we do with that? Can we take that and move on? Knowing like you can always grieve it, but you don't have to be stuck in the cycle of mourning something.
It's the same with illness. People identify with their illness after a certain amount of time, and that is a product of the ego. And there somehow we create a service out of our suffering, right? It's like the ego figures out a way to make that suffering serve us. And so we get attached to it, and it actually becomes part of our identity. And this is when it becomes very difficult to release the illness, because now the sickness is serving you, right? The suffering is serving you. The mourning is now serving you in some way. And most of us, that we don't want to look at it like that. We're like, no, of course I don't want to be stuck in this. No, of course you don't. You don't want to be in a painful place forever. But the ego has figured out a way to make this work for you. Right. And so this is where, and the beautiful thing about these cycles too, is, the dark night of the soul, they show that hero's journey, that in each stage, a teacher arises, right? So someone will come forward in your path and offer an invitation. Right. And so, I think we do need to wrap up, or we could talk for the next 3 hours, but
I was like, we're just getting started really, but so we need to stop.
And, I think next week we'll talk a little bit more about this idea of purpose partner, but, the invitation to be able to do something new. Right. And we talked about that last week too. And that, inside of these cycles, it's, what my invitation would be personally is what I offer my clients and my students is, just step outside of yourself for a moment and be in the objective place, right? So objective means that you're not connected to it anymore, and you're soaring on the wings of eagles, right? You're way up here looking down at what's going on, and from a place of curiosity, right? It's that childlike place of, isn't it interesting that I'm here? Isn't it interesting that I'm feeling this and that, and Ernest Holmes always says in his Science of the Mind, ask yourself, what is the father of my doubt? Where did it come from? Where was it born from? Right. So maybe it's not doubt. Maybe it's suffering in some other way. Maybe it's, the persecution, the victimhood, whatever it is, whatever your thing is. Right. And, isn't it interesting that I find myself here? And take some time to look at it from a different perspective. What am I missing? If I'm here again, what am I missing? How am I not in alignment with myself, or in my relationship with, with God, or, how am I not aligned? Because when you aren't aligned, you're going to suffer the consequence of that misalignment, right? So that's what disease is a misalignment of energy. So trying to figure out, where am I not aligned?
And I was just thinking, yes, more simply, the invitation is first, what keeps coming up and where am I at? It's the same question, but that was what I was thinking. Like, the invitation is, what keeps showing up cyclically for me? Is it in my jobs? Is it with people? Is it just an emotion I keep experiencing? Because you really have to have some emotional IQ if you can pinpoint some of that. And that's, like we said, it's an ever-going cycle. To be able to notice an emotion, I most likely will, suffer a little with that for the rest of my life, whatever that thing is for me. So just recognizing, like you said, go in prayer, and ask God, what is it, if I can't think of it myself, what is it that is showing up cyclical for me? Where are my obstacles? Where are my boulders? And what do you want me to do with it? Where's the source? Like you said, what is the source? I love that. What's my story? What's my source of the emotion I'm carrying with me? And pretty much, everybody's going to come up with their thing. Everybody pretty much knows. You just have to spend a moment and admit it.
And then we go back to, the journal prompt from last week. What are you willing to put down?
Mm.
What are you willing to let go of in order to potentially affect the cycle? Are you willing to let go of a certain perspective? Are you willing to let go of blame and go into forgiveness? Are you, what are you willing to do in order to shift that cycle? And this is where we actually then can start to come up with some sort of purpose plan, right? If you can't, call your coach.
Right.
Like having someone, I think about all the time of like these things that I'm an incredibly intellectual and cerebral person, almost to a fault. Like I could chase my tail for weeks, to have someone, have a purpose partner, have a coach in my life that I can go to and say, this is where I keep banging into the same, what did Einstein say? We can't solve the problem in the same mind that created it, right? So it's like being able to have someone that's just outside of the room to be able to look in and help you with that objective thinking if you're having trouble doing it on your own.
Yeah, because you said like get that bird's eye view of your life. Sometimes we struggle with doing that. Like it literally, when you purpose partner or coach, which usually is one of your purpose partners, if you're aligned correctly and you attract the right coach in. I mean, my coach hits me with, one-liners where I'm like, she doesn't even know me. I haven't been working for her that long, but I know she's aligned into my life, and she'll just hit me with a, well, you do that because you're a high performance person. And I'm like, what? Like, I know I'm a high performer. Like you said, I've been chasing my tail. I know that about myself. I know already. And she's like, yeah, but did you ever connect it to this thing? And I'm like, what? Like body image we were talking about.
They were like,
yeah, I literally am like, what? I'm like, stop talking. We do that for each other. So again, back to like purpose partner, which I think is a great way to start off next week.
So we'll close with the idea of, I mean, as far as the ointment, the protection in this, you have to realize that it's built into natural law, that the opportunity to be protected in this cycle is literally all around you. Do you have a perspective on that, Egan? Like as far as the invitation and the ointment here that is served?
Yeah, I think the whole time we've been talking, I think it's just the belief that God is working all things out. I mean, it's literally like that's what faith is, believing something you can't see. So these cycles keep coming and you haven't seen it yet because you've been on this roller coaster that just never ever ends. And it's like being able to actually, like I said, in the morning, being able to know there is an end to that. And it's going to take you in another cycle and it's going to be lighter and better. But the ointment is really just faith and like believing that if you do the work and you say and you go to God and you ask for help and believing that you don't have to be that way and everything has happened to you to work out for the good, then faith is the ointment in this conversation.
And I mean, in faith in order, right? Faith in the order of things, right? Like regardless of whether you're still someone who's speaking to the universe and you're not talking directly to God yet, it's still the same. It's the same law, the inherent law of goodness. So if you look at it from the perspective of, okay, so the universe just dumped this in my lap, but the law is for inherent goodness. There's got to be a gift in here. So what is it? And the faith that you are being served up a gift and that your prayers are being answered, even if you don't have full clarity on it yet.
Right. And faith to me is trusting in the good. Like you said, whether you call it God or not yet, it's still good. Like you said, natural law, it's still good. But yeah, it's, I think about people that have set up their lives with natural law and the manifesting and becoming better and better and better. It can happen that way. It can happen if you really are living in this mindset of growth and really looking at things from a different view, having your purpose partner, being able to look at things like, why does this keep coming back to me? Just having that thought, just knowing that, being conscious of it, because it's the difference between things just happening to us and happening for us. Right.
So we want to say thank you to everyone that took some time to tune in once again. And, if you did enjoy this time with us, please, throw a like down for us. And leave a heart in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you're getting the announcements and all of the things that come with that. And share with family and friends if you think that someone might resonate with this message. That is one of the best ways that you can help us, is to help us get visibility through all these crazy algorithms that are built into these programs. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll be here same time, same place.
Thank you.